All right, English 3. So in class today, we started in on the Scarlet Letter, which this is my copy. It's an old copy. We only read chapter 1, and I'm going to try to keep up with creating a video for you each week or for each chapter. So before we started, I gave everyone a couple of notes. First of all, if you did not look at the introduction slideshow and click on the video links, you should definitely do so. It also tells you in there that we are not reading the chapter called The Custom House. It's about 40 pages at the beginning of the book, and we will not be reading it. It is not required. It does not impact the rest of the story. So there's a video in the introduction information that gives you an overview of the Custom House chapter. To give you a really short version right here, the Custom House is a chapter about the fictional narrator that Hawthorne has created for the book. So it is a chapter, a very long chapter, that talks about an unnamed narrator who is going to tell you the story, and it gives you his story and how he came up with or why he's telling you the story of the Scarlet Letter. So if you, again, have not looked at the introductory material, the Scarlet Letter is a Scarlet Letter A, and the A stands for adultery. Now, if you did the Puritan research assignment that I posted last week on Thursday, hopefully you got a little bit of information about their culture. For the Puritans, anything that would be considered against the Bible would be considered against their law because they had what was called a theocracy, which just means there is no separation between church and state. If the Bible says it's a sin, then basically their law says it's illegal. And that is one of the things that I would encourage you to know going in. I've also told everyone at the very beginning, this starts out, it's 1642. We're in Boston, Massachusetts. First chapter actually tells you it's June. I will also mention that the first 4 chapters cover one day in Hester's life, and it's the day that she has to suffer through her public humiliation, which is part of her punishment. The book as a whole, though, will cover 7 years. So the book has 24 chapters. When you finish chapter 23, you will have covered 7 years in the story. Chapter 24 is like a flash forward to, it's kind of a where are they now sort of thing. So chapters 1 through 4 cover one day. The book as a whole will cover 7 years. It starts out in 1642, Boston, Massachusetts, and the Puritans have a theocracy as their form of government. All right, I'm going to read through the chapter. I would encourage you to follow along if that's an option for you. Maybe do a split screen with your electronic book, or if you happen to have a copy of the book, I would have it out. I would also encourage you to take notes because there will be a grade for notes. Chapter 1 is called The Prison Door. A throng of bearded men in sad-colored garments and gray steeple-crowned hats, intermixed with women, some wearing hoods and others bareheaded, was assembled in front of a wooden edifice, the door of which was heavily timbered with oak and studded with iron spikes. The founders of a new colony, whatever utopia of human virtue and happiness they might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of the virgin soil as a cemetery and another portion as the site of a prison. So the Puritans, of course, came here for various reasons, primarily religion, but it mentions that they may have come here looking to build a utopia, right? A perfect society. Yet, ironically, the first things that they decided where they needed to go were a prison and a cemetery. So it's sort of strange that if they're here to build a utopia, they recognized right away that they needed a prison for their criminals and they needed a cemetery for their dead people. In accordance with this rule, it may safely be assumed that the forefathers of Boston had built the first prison house somewhere in the vicinity of Cornhill, almost as seasonably as they marked out the first burial ground on Isaac Johnson's lot, and round about his grave, which subsequently became the nucleus of all the congregated sepulchres in the old churchyard of King's Chapel. Certain it is that some 15 or 20 years after the settlement of the town, the wooden jail was already marked with weather stains and other indications of age, which gave a yet darker aspect to its beetle-browned and gloomy front. The rust on the ponderous ironwork of its oaken door looked more antique than anything else in the New World. Like all that pertains to crime, it seemed never to have known a youthful era. Before this ugly edifice, and between it and the wheel track of the street, was a grass plot, much overgrown with burdock, pigweed, apple peru, and such unsightly vegetation, which evidently found something congenial in the soil that had so early borne the black flower of civilized society, a prison. Okay, so far, everything that has described the scene has been pretty dark. It talked about sad colored garments, gray steeple crowned hats. It mentions the rusty iron spikes on the prison, weather stains on the beetle browned, gloomy front. It talks about the ugly edifice, which is like the front of the building. Everything's pretty dark and ugly. Right in front of the prison, there is this big grassy plot, and it's full of weeds, really unsightly weeds. And it mentions the black flower of the civilized society. That black flower, it's figurative language. It's really referring to the prison itself. So everything around the prison, very ugly, except. But on one side of the portal, and rooted almost at the threshold, was a wild rose bush, covered in this month of June with its delicate gems, which might be imagined to offer their fragrance and fragile beauty to the prisoner as he went in, and to the condemned criminal as he came forth to his doom, in token that the deep heart of nature could pity and be kind to him. This rose bush, by a strange chance, has been kept alive in history, but whether it had merely survived out of the stern old wilderness, so long after the fall of the gigantic pines and oaks that originally overshadowed it, or whether, as there is fair authority for believing, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door, we shall not take upon us to determine. Okay, Anne Hutchinson may sound familiar if you did your Puritan research. She may have come up. This was a real person in history. She was accused of being a witch, and she was banished from the Puritan settlement because she had started her own like Bible study and was preaching antinomian doctrine, which is the idea that people can't be saved by doing good deeds. Like it has to do with God's grace and salvation, kind of like Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God earlier this year talked about. Anyway, she was a woman. And so, as a woman in the Puritan culture, she had no business reading the Bible and sharing her thoughts. So, they accused her of being a witch because how else could she get so many people to follow her? And I don't know if she was sentenced to death or not. I don't remember. You'd have to look it up to be sure. So the book says, we don't know if the rosebush just managed to survive here on its own, just happened to have survived, was always there, or if it's because Anne Hutchinson like put a spell and left it there. Finding it so directly on the threshold of our narrative, which is now about to issue from that inauspicious portal, we could hardly do otherwise than pluck one of its flowers and present it to the reader. So this is one of those times when the narrator sort of breaks in and talks to you directly as the reader. Someone compared this to Ferris Bueller on Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which would be a good example. I think the old Disney show Lizzie McGuire did the same thing. Sometimes she would stop and talk directly to the camera. Someone else compared it to Deadpool. So take your pick, but that's kind of what happens. Every once in a while, the narrator stops and talks to you, the reader, directly, telling you something, kind of a little bit of commentary. It may serve, talking about the rosebush, let us hope, to symbolize some sweet moral blossom that may be found along the track, or relieve the darkening close of a tale of human frailty and sorrow. All right. So everything in the scene is very, very dreary, with the exception of this beautiful wild rose bush that happens to sit right outside the prison door. The book tells you it symbolizes, quote, some sweet moral blossom. Kind of is there to as a symbol of hope, like a bright spot in this really terrible scene. And the purpose, it says, is to relieve the darkening close of a tale of human frailty and sorrow. So it's like, here's this little bit of cheer in the middle of a really sad, sorrowful story. All right. I hope that you will write a few things down for chapter 1. You won't have a lot of notes because there's not a whole lot going on. I did find these notes on a website, which I shared on the beginning of the video. But in chapter 1, the narrator sets the scene, which is Boston, 1600s, specifically 1642. And we're under Puritan law, which is a theocracy. The setting's very gloomy, with the exception, of course, of the rose bush just outside the prison door.